I sure was excited to see Gladiator 2, which ended up being ironic because it's not a very exciting movie. I know. I loved the first film. In fact, I've recently watched it in the past few years twice. During the pandemic, I was looking for 3-hour plus movies, or like just really long movies, and so I watched it then. And then in the past year, again, I was looking for something to watch, and I thought, hey, let's get ready for Gladiator 2. So I watched it again, and it was phenomenal both times. It's a fantastic rewatch. It's really still to this day worth revisiting or watching for the first time. I liked the trailer for this movie. I know a lot of people didn't like it, but I thought the trailer for this film was fantastic. And I got to see it in IMAX. Great seat too, as well. Right in the middle, right? Not just in the middle of the screen, but in the middle of the row. Like I was there. I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be great. I had my popcorn. I was just phenomenal. I was so excited. But at least to me, the movie never kicked it into high gear. It started off at like a 6 and never really got beyond, and this is being generous, let's say an 8. Part of me wants to say it never got beyond a 7. But I'll say it got to an 8 because you know what we're all looking for, at least I was, an 11. So I'm stuck here sitting in the 6 to 8 range and I want to be an 11 or higher. The trailer was that high. I mean, it's like they took all the really cool parts of the movie and except for this scene, which wasn't in the movie. I was really looking forward to it. But they took all like that you've just seen the most exciting parts of Gladiator 2. All right, so why didn't it work out? Unfortunately, in my opinion, for so many reasons. First, I don't like apologizing for my opinion, but I know it seems so, I don't know, somebody really hated the trailer, so you might be like, I suspected it. But, again, I thought it looked great, so I would find this hard to believe. And again, no spoilers, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts down below. So first off, the movie, for all the money that was spent on it, hundreds of millions of dollars, just a budget that has ballooned out of control, to which Ridley Scott has said, trust me, bro. And I'm like, I'm looking at the result, Ridley, and I'm not happy. By the way, there's been a lot of talk lately about Ridley saying directors should never retire. And watching this movie, honestly, I was thinking, hey, Ridley, maybe you should retire. All right, so the movie is visually drab for all the money that was spent on it. Men dream, apparently, about the Roman Empire, I would imagine, for its glory. Who wants to see a Rome that's such a cesspool, so pungent, that poor Connie Nielsen has to constantly walk around with a flower glued to her face because of the smell, or that incense has to constantly burn everywhere? We get it. It's a city full of poop. We get it. It's just like every frame they were like, this place sucks. And you're like, then why do I want to spend almost 3 hours here? Hollywood Roman epics back in the day were a big hit because of the grandeur. Oh, look at that. Even the first Gladiator showcased that to a degree. And as I watched Gladiator 2, I was thinking about a lot of other stuff while I was watching Gladiator 2. But I also called to mind Alfred Hitchcock's famous quote that cinema is not a slice of life, but a piece of cake. Now, some people obviously take issue with that quote and say, oh, I want a slice of life. But, Ridley Scott, for all the realness that he seems to be wanting to deliver, and again, nobody asked for it, but you're like, but dude, your movie's being called out for being wildly historically inaccurate. So let us eat cake. Give us Roman wedding cake. We've talked about the wedding cake approach to musicals and fantasies. I think sometimes that's what people want out of a historical film, an epic historical film, particularly one that's fictional. Speaking of the French Revolution, though, remember a little recent movie called Napoleon? I kind of liked Napoleon. I gave it a good review. That was another bit of history recently fudged by Sir Ridley Scott. And there also, of course, Exodus. And this movie is, I'd say, largely indiscernible from those. I'm getting tired of it, Ridley. Like, this is less a sequel to Gladiator and more what's become generic Ridley Scott. With some Roman flavoring this time. The camera angles are often uninspired. I'm like, you can't find a better angle to shoot that rhino? Come on, man. You got a guy standing on a rhino. I should be in it. Then also the sound. The sound mix is low and dull. I was rewatching the trailer to be like, what was not in the movie that was in this phenomenal trailer? And one of the things that captured my attention was how great the sound mix on the trailer was. They're like, roar of the crowd, clang, clang, clang of beat of the drum. And that wasn't in the movie anywhere, basically. I mean, a little bit, but and by the way, Harry Gregson Williams' score is so vastly inferior to the iconic one delivered by Mr. Hans Zimmer. I just recently got to see him in concert thanks to Warner Brothers. He's still playing Gladiator music. It's such a big part of his repertoire, from the original film. And the score here is so inferior that it's not even funny. You're just like shocked that they were like, yes, this will be our new score. And you're like, hold on, let's go back and look at the original score. And you tell me again that this is what we're going to go with. And for all the animals that are included here, some CGI monkeys. I was like, come on, man, that's not a real monkey. A rhino and also sharks. A big deal was made about the sharks. They're hardly in this movie. Not one of those animals had the same impact as the lone tigers. But I mean, obviously, I don't think those tigers were actually there, but that was much more impactful than what we see here. Another huge problem with the movie is the script. The first film kept it simple, which sometimes Hollywood forgets. It was a clear-cut hero and villain. You knew who to root for and against. And a simple message that I think spoke to a lot of people, especially as I recently rewatched the film. It's about what's really important in life, the simple things. And also a very strong focus on faith. I was like, whew, this movie's far more religious than I had remembered. No wonder it did so well. So here, there are way too many plot lines. Also, not really any faith. I mean, they kind of name check faith. They're like, oh, the gods have willed it. Sometimes they're sarcastic, sometimes they're not. And you're like, well, I think you're underestimating how much faith was an important, factor in the success of the first film. But there are too many plot lines and too many characters. So you don't really get to spend enough time with any of them. And therefore, you don't really get to feel attached or invested in any of them. And also, all these things often seem to be working against each other. You're like, how is that going to work if that's happening? I see you guys heading right towards each other. And not in a cool collision course kind of way, but man kind of way. What's more, on that note, every character has an understandable motivation. So it's hard to really root against anyone. You're like, but wait, that guy, well, what they did was wrong. Could kind of have a point, and vice versa. So you can't really root against anyone that much. Even the most horrible characters sometimes have moments of humanity where you're like, wait a minute. And then also, so you can't root really totally against anyone, and therefore you can't really root for totally anyone, because you're like, dude, I don't think you totally understand who you're up against. Maybe you'd find out you have more alike than you think, if you guys would just stop and freaking talk from them. There's one line a little bit like that, it's like, well, I don't want to give anything away, but that was, the movie often feels like just one big misunderstanding and therefore a pointless loss of life. You're like, dude, if we had just waited like another 5 minutes, none of this probably would have had to happen. Also, when Derek freaking Jacobi, who comes back from the first film like a boss, well, it's awesome. A boss that he's in the second film. He has such a small part. But that he dies as if he was a background actor. That's why I can talk about it here, because it's so inconsequential and blink and you miss it. I was like, did they just kill Derek Jacobi in that blink and you miss it shot? You got to ask yourselves, what are we doing here? It's just insanity. Also, it's been made extremely clear in the ad campaign that Paul Mescal is playing the son of Lucilla and Maximus from the first film. But there are two problems with that with the movie itself. One, the actual film treats it as if it's some big reveal. They're like, what? But everybody in the audience knows that's what we're dealing with from the very first frame. So for very much of the film, you feel like you're just spinning your wheels. You're like, that's Lucius. Can we hurry up and start dealing with that? Then also, how on earth could Lucilla lose track of the rightful heir to the Roman Empire? Like, if she thought he was dead, why did she not go looking for him herself or send someone else to go looking for him? It's pretty valuable. You're like, well. And also, how is he not sent off as a boy with at least one protector? You're like, this guy's pretty important. We really should, keep an eye on him. And then since Lucius himself clearly is aware of who he is, how did he never try to contact his mother or his people if he was upset with his mother? What about his people? And over the course of 16 years, and he saw how bad Rome was, even from afar. He wasn't like, it's a little Lion King-y, but, there was a reason for not coming back. He was concerned that he had been made to feel that he was responsible. Simba was made to feel he was responsible for his father's death. Sorry, spoilers for The Lion King. But, that's kind of what happened. And that's why he stayed away for so long. Here, you're just like, here it was just a general kind of being, oh, you were mean to me, Mom. And she's, and it's like, dude, this is the Roman Empire. There are no feelings. It's like there's no crying in baseball. There are no feelings in the Roman Empire. Get back in here. So therefore, that made a lot of the movie very frustrating. She's like, he's alive. And you're like, the Roman Empire could not be in worse, dire straits. How did you just let this thread go? And be like, I guess he did die. Oh, well, I'm not even going to try and verify it. I mean, also sometimes, it's difficult to verify back then. Of all the biblical and historical sagas that have been told or imagined over the years, people go look. That is the basis for a lot of these epic stories. All right, now let's talk about the cast. I'm so sorry, Paul Mescal fans, but I do not see it. I'm sorry. I'm not, at least in this movie, I don't see what a lot of you are seeing. To me, he very much comes across as Russell Crowe light. They're like, oh, the son of Russell Crowe. And I'm like, man, I can see that. And he just simply does not command the screen as the lead in this type of film. In the third act, I did catch some glimpses of a compelling performance, and I think that he does do a pretty good job in the action sequences. He carries himself, I wasn't like blown away, but he carries himself pretty good, There's one very cool shot where he, for the first time in the arena, gets a good look at his enemy, General Acacius. And it was an incredible shot. Not so much for Paul Mescal. It was just a very cool framed shot because he was mostly in shadow. But you'll know it when you see it. It was one of the coolest moments in the movie. I was like, that's pretty neat. And he was in it, so I guess he gets some credit for it. He seems like a nice enough guy, an honorable man, and his best scenes, though, they're not in the arena, and they're not against any of his enemies or allies, much like Russell Crowe's were in the first film, but instead with a doctor for the Gladiators, played by Alexander Karim. And let's just say the two men have excellent chemistry. There's no romance between them in the film, but in those scenes, I could see why Mescal has won over so many fans in his LGBT roles. I was like, oh, I see it there. I caught it, definitely. That's where I caught the strongest glimpse of what some of you are seeing. Speaking of romance, while there wasn't a ton of romance in the first Gladiator because Maximus could love no one but his murdered wife, which made him a very tragic and also very romantic character, there was some flirtation with Connie Nielsen and apparently a child. But there's no romance in this film at all. Lucius also mourns a dead wife, but he seems to be handling it a lot better than Maximus did. And he has no flirtations in this film. And while it seems Lucilla is now married to Pedro Pascal's Acacius, they seem to just be really, 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 really good friends. Outside of that chaste relationship, Pascal otherwise is really strong in the film. He's trying so hard, even though so many of his scenes clearly have been cut. He's doing the best of what's left of his role. While Mescal doesn't quite fit with an epic film like this, Pascal otherwise cuts a dashing figure, particularly in the opening sequence when you see these two men who are clearly supposed to be on a collision course. Not as good a sequence as it could have been. But, Pascal just seems so much more like he's in a big, great historical blockbuster than Mescal does. But Pascal has his Roman uniform, his military composure, and his windswept hair. He's really giving matinee idol. I was extremely excited to see Joseph Quinn here. And yes, he continues to look distractingly like Robert Downey Jr. Like, I didn't see that at first, but now it's all I see. I'm like, oh my God. It's going to be so crazy when he joins the MCU. You're going to be like, is that young Tony Stark on fire? But despite yet another compelling performance, I think Joseph Quinn is a phenomenal actor. Much like I didn't like him in Oppenheimer, but Robert Downey Jr. is a very good actor. But Quinn's screen time has been whittled down to even less than Pascal's. He's hardly in this movie. And I was so disappointed because he was, again, one of the things I was looking forward to seeing the most. Fred Hechinger, as his even more unhinged twin, was way too over the top. And let's just say that Ridley Scott's depiction of not just this LGBT character, but the LGBT elements of ancient Rome, which were plentiful in real life and history, the depiction is so antiquated and cartoonish and I think insulting that I'm surprised that nobody said anything to Scott. Although apparently he does not take criticism well, even constructive criticism. But you're like, whoa, dude. All right, Connie Nielsen's fine. On the positive side, she looks almost exactly the same as she did in the first film 24 years ago. But on the negative side, her role is still just as weak and also still very antiquated as to what women's roles are like in this type of movie. And then, of course, Mr. Denzel Washington. I was also very excited to see him in this sequel. And he, by far and away, brings the most movie star charisma to the film. He anchors it. This film would be such a flimsy nothing without Denzel. And clearly, this role is supposed to draw on one of his most famous ones. But unfortunately, speaking of light, it comes across as Training Day light. Not because of Denzel himself. He does, again, just like Pascal, he does the most with what he has. But because the role is so seriously underwritten. There's a pretty big reveal about this character that absolutely nothing is done to build upon and explore. They're like, boom! All right, let's just walk away from that. And you're like, how can you walk away from that? It totally changes the film. And it instantly makes him a much more complex character. But then it was still hard to understand some of his actions after that and his, what happens with his character. Like, they still treated him in a very simplistic way, even though the character was in many ways the most complex in the film. And I really just, the way the character was handled in the third act, I felt seemed wrong. I did not like what they did with that character at all. I felt bad for Denzel. I wonder how Denzel feels about how the character ended up being portrayed. Because I'm sure the edit did a number on a number of these performances, as it usually seems to do these days. Release the something cut. Yet again, talk about a rallying cry. In the first film, there was discussion about this dream for Rome that Marcus Aurelius or whatever, go watch that movie. It's great. But there was some, talk in the background about a dream for Rome. But again, the core of that first film was Maximus, a man. But yet this new film is supposed to be really looking at Rome, to really take that dream for Rome and put it front and center, which maybe is why they had so many more characters and storylines. But you can't do all that in a single film. That's something that maybe a streaming show could do. I mean, the heart of a nation, the heart of an empire, the heart of the globe is so complex, as we just saw demonstrated in the United States 2024 election. You can't hope to depict that in a single film, which is why the first film was so wise to have a single man as its anchor. And they have some choices here of single men, but they don't, that they could have focused on. Instead, they try to go with all 3 or 4 or 5 and therefore do none of them justice. Gladiator 2 comes off as a bad streaming show that's trying to capitalize on an IP. I mean, we're seeing that in some space. Not all the streaming shows work out, and this seems like one of those. And in fact, Gladiator 2 is a sequel that only underscores the importance of still having original films, still telling original stories and having original ideas that have a magic that is very hard to duplicate. We've seen some movies and sequels be able to duplicate that magic, but it's very hard to do. And this sequel is not one of the films that manages to do it. And that's my non-spoiler review of Gladiator 2, hitting theaters the weekend before Thanksgiving. For those of you not in the United States, that's November 22nd. It's poised to be a big player in the holiday and awards spaces when it comes to Hollywood. And I have to tell you, maybe it'll do well opening weekend because, again, I think the trailer was so good and the first film is so well remembered and regarded with good reason. But I think ultimately it will end up not being a big competitor at the box office or at awards season. I don't think other films have to worry about Gladiator 2. In fact, it pains me to say it, I would not recommend seeing this in theaters. You have a lot of movies that are, vying for your time and your money this holiday and awards season. And this one just simply does not need the big screen because the visuals and the sound, especially, the story, that's one thing. But I think the main reasons to go see a movie on the big screen are because you want to experience those visuals and sound in the arena. And this just isn't really much of a show. All right, so share your thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.